Welcome everyone to ETRAGE's introduction to Creo ModelCHECK. Today's webinar, we will also cover Windchill GateKeeper. As in previous ETRAGE webinars, today we will highlight some powerful functionality that often goes underutilized within PTC software, which can be beneficial to design and manufacturing companies of all sizes. ModelCHECK is likely already turned on within your Creo license, but is also likely not configured to meet your company's pain points and business standards. So today we will walk you through why you may want to take advantage of these two functionalities within Creo and Windchill that you likely already own. Some housekeeping, everyone is muted, so we ask that you use the Q&A icon for questions, and we will answer them towards the end, though feel free at any point to type those in. A recording of today's webinar will be available on our ETRAGE YouTube channel, and everyone that registered will receive a link once it is available. Shay, let's introduce ourselves, if you don't mind changing the slides for there we go. Hi everyone, I'm Sinead and joining me is Shay. We bring over a decade of experience in PTC and manufacturing knowledge. Our shared focus as an organization is on understanding our clients' business challenges and delivering effective solutions. At ETRAGE, our focus is on driving continuous PLM adoption by addressing the needs of your systems, your management, and your end users. So the core of today's agenda will look at why ModelCHECK's ability to set company modeling standards to better control your product's integrity could be beneficial to your entire organization. Shay will then walk us through a demonstration as well as answer your questions. And then we'll walk you through how ETRAGE can assist you when you're ready to act. But before that, let me do a brief introduction of ETRAGE. So ETRAGE is a global company with over 20 years of experience helping PLM adoption extend beyond engineering and really across your entire manufacturing enterprise. We understand that adoption of PLM isn't just a one-time event, but it's a strategic ongoing process focused on continuous improvement. And that evolution is mimicked by the evolution of your business. As a PTC technology partner for over 20 years, ETRAGE continues to develop innovative software and service solutions. And we're helping companies move towards a complete digital footprint and away from manual processes and siloed databases. And we welcome you to check out some of our past webinar recordings to find out more about ETRAGE. So to get us started, I'd like to pose 3 questions for you from your point of view to think about and to answer through today's session. So the first one is, what are the top 3 issues Creo ModelCHECK could help prevent? Second one is, how much would doing nothing about these issues potentially cost in time and resources moving forward? And the third one is, what or who would it take to implement Creo ModelCHECK at your company? So again, are there issues that could be fixed? Is there value in fixing them? And is there anyone who could help? So I want you to think about those, see if you can figure out if there are true answers to that for you right now. And with that, Shay, I hand it over to you.
Oh, sorry about that. I was trying to find the mute button. Yes, hi everyone. So absolutely. So I'll go ahead and dive in here, and the first thing I'll I guess talk through by way of kind of introduction is we'll start from the perspective of I guess you'd say downstream end users. So end users downstream of just typical engineering, right? And so this, for example, would be could be a CNC programmer, right? And in this case, he's trying to, he has for a new part that's just been released, and they're trying to develop manufacturing process plans for, right? It's also trying to create, automated CNC code, right? That will that'll go ahead and machine out the part, right? And as part of that, he has to take the raw CAD file, right? And for each of the features on the CAD file, right? In Creo NC, for example, start to define NC operations to mill out all of those, right? But then he as he's going through that in the CAD file, he finds something like this, right, on a drawing. And in this example right here, some eagle-eyed scouts would easily take a look and catch that and say, okay, well, hold on, that's there's something wrong there, right? That call out says there should be 8 holes. The drawing only shows 6. And when he goes to create that NC operation there, in Creo NC, he'll get several errors that there are 2 buried features. And as a result, and to mill out, a single hole, for example, in NC, there are 4 different operations that need to happen, right? And so for each of those buried features, each of those 2 holes right there, there'll be 4 different errors that'll happen, right? And this kind of an issue is something where he'll see this and, well, what the heck? Either the model is wrong or the software is wrong. So, something doesn't jive here, right? Either someone meant to put 6 but wrote 8, or legitimately there are 2 buried features. But what I see on the model and the call out don't match up. And ultimately, all this just means is it's incredibly frustrating, right? It becomes a pain to then have to figure out, okay, well, where's the issue and where is it occurring and how can I fix it, right? And then this oftentimes may result in an angry walk up to the engineering manager's office to say, hey, your engineers are not designing these things appropriately, right? Or here's an example here, or Teams message or Slack message or what have you to engineering to say, hey, here's a discrepancy, 6 versus 8, print versus call out. Help me understand this, right? But again, all this is it's very frustrating to have to deal with bad data in your CAD model, and it's very easy to see how this could impact downstream operations, right? Now, in this one example, yes, as a CNC programmer, right? But you could also take the thought of what if this person was a machinist, right? Okay, so yes, he's milling these things out by hand, right? It's still the same issue. You still see, a case where the print and the call out don't align, and then you have to ask the question, well, what do I do here, right? Or you could even say, what if this, this it's past that stage, something has been built, and now it's, or for example, it's now in the quality department, right? And quality inspector is now having to take a physical model that they have in front of them and compare that to a 2D print to verify that everything that was spec'd out to be designed to be built per design is actually manufactured, right? And so the quality inspector looks at it and says, okay, well, the print shows 6 holes, but there's 8 of them spec'd out on there. Or even take it further to other downstream, departments. And it's easy to see how one little mistake, one little error in your model can proliferate through the organization, right? And oftentimes, they say, in engineering world, when you create one CAD model, I think 80% of the people that will use that CAD model, 80% of the life of that CAD model will happen outside of engineering, will happen after engineering, after it's been released, right? And so it's very easy to see how, again, one mistake can proliferate through and spoil everything. And so again, that programmer storms angrily up to the engineering manager's office, who's happily drinking his coffee, and all of a sudden he says, hey, these this is incorrect. So something is wrong here. You guys aren't doing this properly, or what have you. Help solution this, right? And so now in this case, he then has to figure out, okay, well, how often is this occurring? Is this a training issue? And what other issues are there in the models that we don't know about? Because ultimately in these kinds of scenarios, right, in engineering organizations, you can have tons of different users with varying levels of experience with knowing how to model in CAD in general, but Creo in particular, right? Varying backgrounds and also varying levels of expertise, and also different people approach the same problem differently, right? And so one person could build a model more robustly than others, right? And so all of a sudden, all of that is just a recipe for, again, inaccurate or incomplete data in your Creo models, and how that could just spiral downstream into unintended consequences. Now, another concern, in this case, for on a managerial perspective, could also be something like you could say like an M&A scenario, right? So again, beyond just, yes, we're producing our own parts, right? This manager just gets a call that the executives have purchased another company, right? And now he has to integrate their parts and their processes and their products into the current operations, right? And so meaning he's not having to inherit a whole new library of Windchill and Creo models, right, to integrate with his and then use in their business processes, right? And so then the question is, well, for the incoming team, how do they design? I don't know. What do they have the same parameters that we have, that we use as part of our business processes? Do they have our part number or cage code or things like that? Like all of those questions start to pop up, right? And then there's a need for sanitizing the incoming data to match your current business processes, right? Again, all of that just leads to a ton of, again, frustration, right? Whereby, again, whether it's inexperience and or just diverse and varying in engineering and modeling expertise, right, plus also sometimes the need to sanitize data, right? All of a sudden you realize it's very frustrating to have to deal with inaccurate or incomplete data. And if only there was a software solution that could help catch many of these issues ahead of time, right, and offer a solution for that, right? And so that is where ModelCHECK comes in. Now, firstly, so ModelCHECK is a application that is not an add-on, right? It's completely integrated into Creo. It's been there now for probably the last 2 decades. It's very highly configurable, right? And so it's not a one size fits all. It's a based on your business process, but the typical things that you need to have in your model in order to function, right? You can configure ModelCHECK to check for those things specifically, right? It can run in a few different ways, right? A show interactive, or automatic or batch. Ultimately, just to say, number one, you can ask ModelCHECK for help when you need it, or you can ask it to check your model when you need it, right? Or you can have it just run automatically as you're working. Maybe, for example, whenever you save a model or when you regenerate a model, right? Or you can even, take a sample, batch set of models and dump them in a particular folder or in a repository in Windchill and have it just check all of those and correct any errors it finds automatically. And ultimately, it's a design standards checker tool, right, or solution that checks the model you have versus any design standards that it's been pre-configured with, and verifies that it matches that or not. And if it does not match, it'll notify the user with maybe an error or a warning, right, and print that data into the file as well, right? Now, the biggest differentiator here with ModelCHECK is that, number one, is that it's free, right? It's something that, if you've purchased a Creo license probably in the last 2 decades, it's in there. So this is not an add-on that you have to pay extra, you know, in PTC maintenance for or subscription revenue. It's you already own it. So it's just a matter of, you know, turning it on, right? And that is kind of where the rub is with ModelCheck, is, again, because it's a, you know, 2-decade-old, you know, solution. It's not as easy to administer. The help files are not, you know, that user friendly, right? And so it takes a lot of sifting to actually understand what it can do and then how to match it to your business processes. And so that's the reason why the implementation really matters, right? Beyond just yes, you know, turning it on, it's making sure that it's tuned to check for things that you need to check for within your business. Right. Now that talks about ModelCheck, right? Now GateKeeper is a completely separate application that can work hand in hand with ModelCheck. Right? ModelCheck is entirely within the Creo parametric, right? And so, meaning if you had 0 Windchill at all, you could still use ModelCheck, right? Now GateKeeper, on the other hand, this is a Windchill-based solution, right? And this allows Windchill to prevent the check-in of data, right, until it meets any predefined criteria set for ModelCheck. Right? And this is, again, fully customizable per Windchill context. You can set this, you know, on a site level, org level, product level, you know, library, or even a project, right? But in all of those cases, it'll check based on any predefined criteria to say, for example, you set it to check for, you know, ModelCheck errors, you know, that are less than 2. Right? And so then GateKeeper will, if that's turned on a context, it'll check and ensure, okay, is that the case? Is there any model coming in with less than 2 errors? You know, if so, it can pass. If not, halt it. Right? And let the designer know, hey, you can't check this in, meaning you need to go back and work on your model before you can check it in. And it'll tell you explicitly, it says, hey, you know, the limit is for, you know, 2 errors to pass. This model has something greater than that. So again, it's a utility that runs so to verify essentially what ModelCheck has already done and then, you know, allow the passage of data in or out, right? Again, it's free, right? You already own it. It comes, you know, in every seat of Windchill. But again, it also requires, you know, customization in order to have it run, right? And so the way I want you to think about, you know, ModelCheck versus, you know, GateKeeper, it's almost, you can think of the analogy of like your driver's license, right? Where, you know, you go to the BMV to get your driver's license, right? And that's one federal institution, and they give you a driver's license and they print out all the information on that, right? Versus if you then want to, for example, you know, board an airplane, right? A different federal institution, TSA, at least I'm talking about, you know, institutions here in the United States for context here, the TSA, the Transportation Security Administration, right, will take a look at your ID and then verify that it's, you know, Real ID compliant, you know, information on there, and that you can actually board a plane, right? Completely different institution, right? But again, TSA is only looking at data that the BMV already printed on your license, right? That's a similar analogy in this case, in that when you run ModelCheck on a part, right, within Creo, ModelCheck can print information onto that part, and then and that you just stay on the part, right? Now, if you have Windchill GateKeeper, if you turn that on, then GateKeeper will just look on the part for any information that ModelCheck has already printed on there, and then validate based off of that information. All right. So all that being said, I'll pause here real quick, and I'll jump into a live demo here to show you the power of, you know, ModelCheck and GateKeeper, and how you can use it to, again, verify and validate, you know, your incoming engineering data to ensure that you're catching errors ahead of time, right? And having them being, you know, worked upon and fixed, and so that way you have minimal issues and errors coming into Windchill, right? Or if you don't have Windchill, if you're just using a, you know, standalone system without a PLM, you could still run ModelCheck in that environment as well. And again, with the ultimate end goal of ensuring that your data is clean. All right, so I'll pause real quick while I switch screens here and show the live demo here. You should be looking at Creo right now, yes. And I'll go ahead and show ModelCheck in action real quick, right? And so in this example here, I have this, a wheel here, and it has, six-hole pattern, right? ModelCheck, to access it, by the way, it's under File and then Prepare, and there's a few different modes over here. There's the interactive mode, which is where you're asking it to run and generate a report. It can run on a part or an assembly or drawing. There's also the regenerate mode as well, which in this case, you can, if you click on that, it will regenerate the model and then check for any issues or errors that have been flagged for it to check for on regen. And then there's two other modes as well. You can run it in batch or on save mode whenever you hit the save button as well. So for purposes of this demonstration here, I'll be using primarily the interactive mode, right? And I'll go ahead and in this case, before I make any changes here, I will again say, for example, there's a ECN or just in the part of the design process, as a designer, I go in here and again, this is a very typical process here. I go ahead and I change this this set of this pattern over here, and I say that's going to be an eight hole pattern, right? And without looking, I just go ahead and save it, and then I'm done, right? If I have ModelCheck, I can go in here and it's configured, I should say. I can go ahead and run this check, and it pulls out a report, right? And this report is very helpful because it shows many different things, right? So first off, it shows in this case any warnings in the model, right? In this case, it says, okay, well, your relations have errors, right? You can also view them right over here at the very top as well, right? And so any errors, any warnings, and any checks that actually passed, right? And so I can click on the errors, for example, and it'll expand and show where the error is, right? And I can go ahead and, for example, even if I select on that error right there, all the way down to I can select on the feature where the error occurs at, and it'll highlight that in the model tree and on Creo as well for me to see. So again, it's an incredibly helpful diagnostic tool where you can drill down and see where exactly is the issue, right? Now, additionally, it also has a ton of other information when it comes to, say, for example, if I come to the information group over here, so this will show again many of the checks that passed, right? And so of course it didn't make it into the first two groups over here, but again, it can check many things by default, even things like, for example, does the model have default densities, right? Or of like 0, or did someone actually assign a material that has a density to this, right? It can check your start part information, right? It can check layer information as well. It can check parameter information, or it can even do things like renaming parameters as well, or deleting parameters or adding new parameters, right? So yeah, there's a ton of additional checks that ModelCheck can validate for, right, within a part. Right? But in this case here, I have this information here. It's two buried features. Now, if I did nothing about this, as a designer, if I did not run ModelCheck and I did not know about this, right, I would have just checked it in, and the error would have been inside of Windchill, right? And then that will lead to, again, the same issue we just talked about earlier, right? The slides. Versus now with ModelCheck, now that I ran it, something I'll show right here in the parameters list over here. Over here, there's these set of parameters, right? And starting from here, the source is ModelCheck. All these are locked, so that way it cannot be user edited. Only ModelCheck itself can modify these parameters. But when it's done checking the model, it will print out information on that within the model, right? And so it says over here, I checked it on this day at this time. It gives you a timestamp. Specifies how many errors were in the model when it checked it, right? with the configuration files that were used to check it, and the mode is as well interactive mode, right? So all that information, and in this case, there's a part number, or I guess a PN attribute in here as well. We'll come to this after the fact. So all this information is in here, right? And so now, if I want to go ahead and say I save this, I want to check this in, right? My workspace. I hit check-in. It says, hold on, the check-in failed. And you see that in the message bar at the bottom here. If I go into the event management console and I look at the conflicts here, it says over here, hold on, the check-in failed, and this is the reason here. The number of errors in the model is greater than the permissible value of, in this case, 0 in this context I'm checking it into. And so I told Windchill, anything greater than 0, flag it and don't let it check in. And so that's why I did that, right? And so again, this is a cue for the user to say, you know what, I have to go in and fix that. I just cannot let it slide. I just can't push the model in. It has to be fixed so the data comes in clean. Right? Now, in order to fix this, right, it could be something as simple as I could come in here and edit this and say, now you see here the issue is, originally was 6 members that were spaced 60 degrees apart from each other, right, which would make 360, versus now it's 8 members, and so this 60 would mean that, 2 of them will double up on each other, right? Versus if I just say, hey, let's do the total angular extent, right? Creo can calculate the spacing automatically, right? And so now the model updates, right? I can then go in here and say, okay, let's go ahead and rerun model check. Okay, so in this case here, there's 0 errors, right? That error is no longer there, right, for the buried features, right? I can also take a look at the parameters real quick. And we'll notice over here, it was again, model check now updated these parameters, and now there's 0 errors shown in here, right? And so I can now go ahead and say, I want to check this in, right? Actually, I'll save first, and then yep, check that in. And there we go, check-in succeeded, right? So again, it ensures that any issues or errors that model check flags, right? GateKeeper will check those and ensure that those issues are fixed, or at least the number of errors are 0, or whatever under the predefined value, before you can go ahead and then check that into Windchill. Now, there's a couple other things that model check can do as well, and I'll kind of, I guess, highlight some of them using another set of examples really quick here. So what I'll do really quick is I'll go ahead and quickly tweak some model check settings off screen here, and then I will relaunch Creo, because one of these particular settings here needs to be initialized when model check when Creo starts up, right? And so again, that's the thing for model check. Some settings you can change on the fly and it'll update, right? For other settings, Creo needs to relaunch it for it to read those in, right? So I'll go ahead and here. All right, so in this case here, I will go ahead and open this same model now, and with those new settings, right, that I just added in here, right, you'll notice a few things, right? In this case, of course, it shows 2 errors, right? And if I take a look at that, it says, hold on. So number 1, there is some missing parameters, right? Again, this is because in this new setting I just configured, I told it, hey, check for specific parameters. There should be a parameter called company, right, in here. If it does not exist, flag that as an error, right? So again, you can think of, are there cases where you have your, parameters for maybe it's designer, maybe it's cage code, maybe it's your company, any particular attributes that you need, such that when you need it to be validated and updated from the CAD level, so it passes on to PLM or PDM and or ERP and other downstream applications. At the source right here, ModelCheck can check and verify that a designer actually, they're in the model and or that they were filled in. Right? And if not, it'll show that as a warning or an error. Right? Now, these two are actually related to the same thing. The start check error is just saying over here, the parameter company is missing, right? But you also notice a few things as well. Is number 1 over here in the update section, there's this layer place, right? This over here is ModelCheck saying, hey, you already defined for me some layers that should be added to the model, right? One of those was called cuts. I did not see that layer in the model, but I automatically added it. Right? This functionality right here is part of what Creo calls a ModelCheck update or model update, right? Where there are some specific checks that, again, don't need a particular user to change or to verify or look at. And in those particular checks, ModelCheck can just run those automatically. So you can think of a case where, for example, if you have, you want to delete certain parameters from a bunch of models, or you want to add new parameters to a bunch of models, or you want to, map parameters and say, okay, from, again, incoming company that I acquired, they have an attribute called PN, right, for their part number. We call it part number, right? So, hey, ModelCheck, I want you to go through these 500,000 parts. Map the attribute from PN to part number. So take the contents from PN, map it to part number, and delete PN. All of that ModelCheck can run with model update with no human input, just in batch mode. You can even think of things like, hiding or blanking layers, or creating layers, or moving layers, or creating views. Right? There's a ton of checks that ModelCheck can even run by itself. It's just updating files, right, in batch mode, right? And so again, this is just kind of a high-level overview of what you can use ModelCheck for, right? How it runs, how it functions as, right? And again, all of it just has to do with how it's configured, right? In this particular example here, it's there's a different number of issues that it's checking for compared to the prior example I just showed, right? So again, all of that meaning how you configure ModelCheck matters, but ultimately it's an incredibly powerful tool that you already own, and when you use it appropriately, it can ensure model quality from the start, right? To ensure that any models that you're using and checking into your PLM system are actually clean and going forward. Or even if you don't have PLM, if you're just using Creo standalone, you can still use ModelCheck as well. So, okay, also I just went through a demo of ModelCheck and also GateKeeper, and again, just a very high-level demo of how you can use it, right? You can dig much deeper into the weeds on that, right? But at this point, whenever I usually show this, right, people oftentimes will say, well, how do you get started? How do we, implement this, right? And so this is what we typically recommend, right? Number 1 is, you can contact us for a custom demonstration if you need one done, or sometimes you can just do or if you need a demonstration done for, other departments within your organization, right? Step 2 would be, once there's some buy-in, right? Step 2 would be, we can schedule, a ModelCheck evaluation on your parts. This for us, we would offer this at no cost to you, right? We would say you could send us a small sample size, maybe 100, 200 parts or so, right? We can run those with some, best practice model check, checks, right? And then give you a report that shows you in this, and then you can evaluate that report to see, okay, well, how many of my models are actually, following best practices? How many of my models are, have modeling issues where, for example, there's a child, there's a feature that's a child of a round or a chamfer, which again can be can be an issue when something is going to be updated in the future, right? And so those kinds of issues, you'd want to see that and flag that ahead of time, so that way a designer can change it before it becomes a bigger issue, right? And that could also then be a leading indicator of, okay, well, maybe these particular users all usually have this particular issue, and so maybe they may need to get more training and upskilling. But again, so we can do that evaluation on your part at no cost to you, right? So that way you can then get a better understanding of the typical issues you face, right? And we can then, consult with you on your business processes, so that way we understand where you want to go and where you are now, essentially, right? By evaluating your models now, and then your business processes that you would like to go to, right? And then we can use ModelCheck as a bridge to help you get there, right? And so that's sort of that step 3 would come in, is we then build a customized, implementation plan for your company, where we can say, okay, well, these particular issues 1, 2, 3 are the ones that we notice you typically run through the most, and so here's how we can configure ModelCheck to check for those issues, right? But also not only just in the configuration, because oftentimes one of the big hangups or hiccups in ModelCheck is also the adoption piece as well, right? Oftentimes, some people may not take kindly to not being able to check in the model, right? That could be frustrating, right? Or, not take kindly to something, an automated system that just checks their model, after them and flags them if there's an issue, right? And so being able to roll it out to the company in such a way where it minimizes friction and eases the adoption, to ensure that people understand it's there to help and to be an aid and not to be a roadblock, right? Those are all of those are things that we can help, smooth out during the implementation process as well, right? All right. So again, the goal. So the question then is, what happens if you do take us up on this, and what happens if you do go through the 3-step process there when you get started? Well, ultimately, it would mean significantly improved manufacturing processes, right? You can start to catch engineering errors in your models at the source, right, before it ever makes it past engineering to manufacturing, or to your CNC operator, for example, or to quality, or to service, or to any of the other downstream departments post engineering, right? Ultimately meaning then that you have accurate data at the source, and all of that then means you're able to then build and with confidence, right? There's a lot more collaboration that happens and occurs when you know that, what, we're dealing with the right data and it's being modeled accurately, right? And frankly, as a designer, I would love it if, in cases where I fat finger something, right? There's a solution, behind me that goes in and checks and calls my attention to it in real time, rather than me having to get called into the manager's office saying, hey, my issue is pointed out in front of everyone, right? And so all of that being said, is implementing ModelCheck could mean tremendous success, right, for your company, right? Now, what's at stake? What happens if you say, you know what, thanks but no thanks, we want to go ahead and continue with business as usual, right? Well, ultimately that just means whatever issues you're currently facing that could be related to model quality, right? Those are still going to proliferate, right? You're still going to have issues where many downstream departments will suffer from inaccurate models that come from engineering. You're still going to have issues where if you're merging data sources, right, or acquiring a new company, for example, right, you need to get their data in and sanitize it. You'll still have issues. Maybe you'll have an intern sit there and flip through 500,000 parts one by one, changing and updating parameters, not knowing that there's already a free utility that can do that for you automatically. So with everything you just shared so far, right? I'd say that the end goal and when our call to action is to transform your manufacturing, right? Is to engage with us and ensure that you can use and implement ModelCheck in a successful way, such that you can have supremely improved manufacturing processes, right? That result from that, and yeah, and ultimately ease the frustration, ease the pain, and have essentially joy all around, right? So. With that being said, I'll pause right now and I'll take some questions. And so, if you have any questions, you guys, you can write them in the questions pane of the Zoho webinar panel here, and we'll go ahead and answer them. And while we do that, I'll move over to the next slide, so that way Sinead will come back and we'll talk about our upcoming events.
Yep, so look for that question mark icon and you can type your questions there. We do have some events left in 2025. On December 10th, we'll be presenting our last webinar around ETRAGE hosted Windchill, which also includes a full administrative support. And then on December 15th through the 19th, we will be running a instructor-led introduction to Creo class that can be attended virtually for anyone looking to have new staff ready for the new year. And then looking ahead to 2026, you can check out etrage.com for our webinar schedule. We will continue to cover a wide array of topics tied to PLM, CAD, managing documents, quality, much, much more. Additionally, on our website right now, you can find our public Creo and Windchill schedule through April of 2026. Let's see, Shay, we do have one question that's come in so far. It says there are many different checks within ModelCheck and different levels of strictness to apply. Can you help us to know what levels would align with best practices? And then additionally, keep in mind we have lots of old legacy data with very poor modeling.
Oh, yes. Great question. Yes. So this would be, so yes, there are, tons of, hundreds of checks, within ModelCheck, right? There are best practice, recommendations on what to apply, right? In order to, for each of the different checks. And first off, which checks, are important to you? Which checks do you need to apply based on your business processes, right? And then from there, what's the end goal, right? Are you just trying to get the data clean and then archived away, right? That may be different than, are you trying to get the data clean and then using your current day-to-day production, right? And so I think all of that are things that we can discuss through, again, that kind of implementation plan, or maybe it's kind of a consulting session, right, where we can look at where you currently are, where you're trying to go, and then we can kind of work with you through, okay, well, how do you configure ModelCheck to meet exactly what you're trying to do, right? And yeah, all of that are things that we've helped tons of customers with as well, right?
So I think tied to that, another question, Shay, is do we have examples of those, that checklist that we'd be able to share?
Are there example check files that you can share? There are example check files that are within the Creo installation directory, right? And so Creo does come with a few different example check files, so you can refer to and use those and peruse those, right? And if again, like I said, for 20-year-old software, right, it's can be difficult to piece together, right? But if you can piece it together, then yes, you can use those check files to figure out, okay, well, how can I guide myself through what to turn on, what to turn off, and how to turn it on to what level, right? I will say beyond that, those examples, we don't offer any custom ones ourselves, and for the simple reason that almost anyone that configures ModelCheck, it's typically a custom application, right? And as a result of that, we oftentimes find that what works for one person doesn't work for another in terms of what they want to check for, how they want to check for it, and in what order. And so that's typically why.
Let's see. Looks like we have another one came in. Is there a way to activate checks that apply for all new models moving forward, but omit old legacy data that we don't have the bandwidth to go back and fix? So is there a way to turn on model check to just start today moving forward?
Correct. Yeah, great question. So yes, that's definitely possible, right? That I think would depend on your legacy data versus your current data, and if there's some automated way for model check to identify the difference, right? So maybe is there something that you typically have in your legacy data that's not in your current state data, right? Or vice versa, right? And so that way you can have it filter out based off of that, or you could also filter it out by all that information using maybe, for example, by setting conditions, right? Which is something we didn't get into, but yes, model check, you can configure it to run based off of if XYZ conditions are met, run model check with these set of files, or if ABC conditions are met, don't run model check at all, right? And so yes, all of that is fully customizable in terms of having model check run, on current files and not run on legacy data. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. If you have a question after today's session is over, please send those to us. We will be sharing our contact information at the end of today's session. So we do have a call to action. Shay, if you can share the next slide. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah. So at the beginning of today's session, I posed 3 questions. To recall, I asked, what are the top 3 issues Creo ModelCHECK could help prevent? How much would doing nothing at this point about those issues, how much would they cost in time and resources moving forward? And additionally, what or who would it take to implement ModelCHECK at your company? If you find, whether it's right now or in the future, that you do have design issues that are affecting your people downstream, that there is a desire to address the issues because the cost of doing nothing is too big, and that you would like help engaging other stakeholders, ETRAGE can help. As Shay said, we can meet to talk through next steps and help you create an implementation plan and identify what is important to be checked within your business plan. We can also, at no cost to you, if you share models with us, we can run a model check, meet with you, and give you feedback to help you decide how you'd want to move forward with an implementation. And then additionally, engaging stakeholders, we can set up a demonstration and go through what is model check with them and get their input as well. Let us know.
Sinead, I was going to jump in there real quick actually on that last point, because I think that's very important, because oftentimes there's some users that they find at webinars where you may, number one, you may think, well, cool technology, but I don't know if I have a problem. I don't know if our models are really that bad, right? Well, then that's a great opportunity to say, okay, well, let's share a sample set of models, and we can, and for all, model check could run on those, and you could see that your designers are incredibly amazing, and they have followed a ton of good best practices, and you have really clean models. Props on you. That's an amazing and very efficient operation, right? Or you could find, well, there are a few more issues than we'd like that we realize, but now with a model check report, it's now quantifiable, right? And additionally, what we've also found with that report when we provide it to customers is they start to look and see, well, which other departments can I involve in this, right? Which other departments are affected, right? And then you start to, then all of a sudden the footprint for who, like Sinead was asking about, which other stakeholders need to be involved in this to get this approved, right? Starts to improve and starts to get bigger, and you start to realize, okay, well, it's a it's a company-wide initiative versus, oh, just something that affects, one particular person, right? And so if you're a designer in here looking at this thinking this would be amazing, but I don't know how to spread it through a company, this is also a great example. And you could use that report to start to identify other users or other departments downstream where, you could all come together and have this be a company-wide initiative as well.
Yeah, so you reach out to us, you let us know how we can help you take action today, if you are ready today or when you are. Shay, we did have a couple more questions that came through. If we could answer them quickly. I know we're running close to the hour. We want to make sure that people can move on to their next appointments. But the one question is, the example you used with a solid model, but what if surface models that lack features when the original vendor converts that model to step files? Can ModelCheck help fix these surface model issues?
It's great question. I think for that one, let me see here. You could, yeah. So many of the checks typically would work best, I would say, on native models, right? And I think that's where you're getting at there. And so for but there are checks that you can have it run on the geometry itself that are irrespective of whether it's a native model or not, right? And so one example of that I can think of is, for example, the short edges check, which will check for, if there's, features smaller than a certain size that you may already have set that limit, so that way, and maybe those small features may not be manufacturable, right? And so in that case, that could be something where, again, if that could be a key that could be flagged in those step files that you get from vendors, then you could have ModelCheck check based off of that, right? And it'll still flag those as warnings and issues or errors, right? And so it all depends on what exactly it is that you're trying to identify and flag, right? And then we're looking at the ModelCheck documentation to see, well, how can we piece together one or a couple of checks to identify that issue, right?
And then the last one is, this relates to parameters that files need for Windchill GateKeeper. So keep that in mind. If we run ModelCheck on a part or assembly to get a report without Creo thinking the part has been edited. How do we run a ModelCheck on a part or assembly to get the report without Creo thinking the part has been edited?
How do you thinking the part is? So if you, in a case where you do that, yeah, so you're still able to, I guess I'll say this, you're still able to run ModelCheck without editing the part, right? And it should still print out for you the, the timestamp or the attributes needed for GateKeeper, right? When it was run, without the models needing to be modified, I should say, or edited, right? And that's something where, again, if you share an example here, we can work through that, or we can, talk offline about it. But yes, that's totally possible to do that. Or even if there's, there's a need to edit the model, we can always, figure out a way to, make a small tweak and then undo it or something to that effect. But again, all of that is entirely possible. It's just a matter of, reaching out to us, and we can help you work through that, I would say.
All right. Next slide. And we'll wrap this up. Just wanted to let you know that ETRAGE continues to address real business problems. We continue to expand our solutions. We do that because we collaborate with companies just like you. As software developers, we love solving problems around CAD, PLM. As I said earlier, we invite you to learn more about our ETRAGE software and services from past webinars, as well as attending our 2026. You can find the winter webinar schedule on our website, or reach out. We're happy to start a conversation. If you have a current problem and you don't see a solution listed here, let's talk. Our team is flexible and super creative. So Shay, let's share our contact information so that they can reach out to us. ETRAGE will be sending a link of today's recording for you all to rewatch or share with your colleagues. We are so happy that you were able to attend, and we will see you next time. Thanks.